Hi, welcome to our daily encounter. Today we're going to talk about the time in which Jacob wrestled with God. Jacob was on his way back to his father's house. He had left Laban and his property, and Laban comes out chasing him because Jacob left without telling Laban he was leaving. And they end up making peace. Everything turns out okay. But then Jacob has to prepare to meet his brother. And Jacob is very, very nervous about this. He had heard that Esau was coming out to meet him with 400 men. And that would have been very terrifying, especially knowing their history. Because if you remember, Jacob had lied, he had deceived his father in order to receive the blessing that was supposed to go to Esau. And when Jacob had left Esau was infuriated. He was just waiting for the right time to execute vengeance on him. And now he's coming to Jacob with 400 men. And so you can just imagine what's going through Jacob's mind here. Well, it's late at night, or it's at night, and Jacob sends his wives and children across the ford of Jabbok, and he's basically there by himself. And this wrestling occurs between him and this man, and they wrestle until daybreak. And when the man that he's wrestling with saw he was not prevailing, he touches Jacob's hip, and it dislocates, and Jacob still wrestles some and will not let the guy go, and says that he will not let him go until he blesses him. And he says, well, what is your name? And he says, my name is Jacob. He says, your name will not be Jacob anymore, it will be Israel, for you have strived with God and with man and have prevailed. And so this is a very peculiar story and a very strange story as you're reading through the Old Testament, but we find it to be a very important story, and a story that is just full of application for our lives, especially when we compare it to the scenario with Abraham when the Lord had come to him. You see, Jacob has the Lord come to him in human form, and they wrestle. Well, Abraham also had the Lord come to him in human form, but things went a lot different then. If you remember, we had a devotion about this a few days ago, and we commended Abraham for the way that he received the Lord and received the Lord's presence. It started out with Abraham basically resting. He's sitting in the front of his tent, just sitting there. And it's then that he sees the Lord coming, and with eagerness and with reverence, he rushes out to meet him. He says, don't go any further, stay here. He makes all the accommodations. He continues in the Lord's presence and fellowship and enjoyment. And it's just this beautiful, beautiful episode of Abraham spending time with the Lord. And this is totally different than what we see with Jacob, because where Abraham was resting when the Lord came to him, Jacob was striving. Jacob was planning. Jacob was trying to figure out a way to overcome this obstacle of having to meet his brother, and trying to figure out all the ins and outs and all the different scenarios, things that could occur, and trying to be prepared. He was not resting at all. And even when the Lord came to him, he did not come out and meet him with eagerness and with reverence and all this. It was with striving and with wrestling. And so there's a stark contrast between the two. Also, the end of the encounter is quite different. Abraham ended his encounter with the Lord with revelation. The Lord recognizing the fact that Abraham was like a friend, and he could tell Abraham what he was about to do. And he tells him about Sodom and Gomorrah, and you have that beautiful exchange between Abraham and the Lord, and showing how the Lord listened to him and actually said that he wouldn't destroy the city if there was 10 righteous people in it. And a very good ending to that encounter. But with Jacob, he ends up with a limp. He ends up with a dislocated hip that bothered him for the rest of his life. And so it was very, very much a different scenario. And what we find with these two contrasts is our the two ways in which we might approach the Lord and approach our relationship with the Lord. Because there are two stark different ways that we can interact with the Lord and engage the presence of the Lord in our lives. Many times what we do in our relationship with the Lord is we strive with the Lord. We wrestle with the Lord. How many times have we wrestled with God? In other words, we had our lives figured out. We have what we want. We have what our desires are. And our lives before the Lord is really basically about us striving with the Lord, trying to get the Lord in line with what we want. Maybe it's us just wanting peaceful circumstances or a comfortable atmosphere in which to live. Or maybe it's wanting to acquire the things of this world or some other thing. And we have all these wish lists that we have, and we're constantly coming to the Lord, saying, Lord, get in line with what I want, get in line with what I want. And we're striving and we're wrestling with Him in that way. Or maybe there's times in which the Lord basically says, okay, this is what I want for your life. This is my will for you. And we strive against that. And we work against the Lord. And we fight the Lord because that's not the direction we want to go. That's not the way we want our lives to turn out. And so there's this battling, this striving. And we're constantly stressed out. We're constantly trying to manipulate and plan our circumstances, trying to make everything work out the way that we planned it to work out. And when we meet with the Lord, that's where we're at. We're in this disposition of striving and working and struggling and wrestling. Well, whenever we're in that type of mind frame, when we're approaching the Lord, don't be surprised if sometimes He has to touch our hip. And it may not be literally touching our hip like He did with Jacob, but we find that God sometimes has to touch things in our lives to get us to stop striving and stop wrestling with Him. He might have to touch our finances. He might have to touch our relationships. He might have to touch our education. Whatever it is, the list may go on. But there are strong points in our lives, strongholds in our lives that we have, that we hold on to, and that we use to wrestle against the Lord. And so He has to touch these different aspects of our lives, and we end up walking away limping. We become, of course, injured because we're fighting against God, and it becomes a very, it's not really the best scenario. Whereas if we approach the Lord with the way that Abraham did, things turn out so much better. If we approach the Lord in rest, and rest represents faith. When we have faith, when we have trust in the Lord, we can rest. And when we approach the Lord, it's from the standpoint of rest. Lord, I know that you are faithful. I know that you are trustworthy. I know that even if circumstances don't work out the way that I would have them work out, it's okay. And I rest in that. And I trust you in that. And we approach the Lord from the standpoint of rest. And then we can come to Him in eagerness and in reverence. And we can invite the Lord in, not to force Him into our will, but rather to invite Him into fellowship with us, where we can feast with the Lord, enjoy the presence of the Lord, because we're constantly resting in Him. There is no striving, there is no wrestling, there is no trying to force the Lord our direction. It's all about just enjoying His presence. And when we can live a life of full surrender, saying, Lord, I don't care where my life goes. I don't care what I do in my life. I don't care what happens to me in my life. All I want is fellowship with you and a deep, committed relationship with you. There is great joy and peace and comfort in that type of life. It's only when we go the way of Jacob that we end up limping and we end up hurt. Let's go I don't know if you've ever heard your parents say this before, but they say, we can do this the easy way or we can do this the hard way. Well, Jacob was always doing it the hard way. He was always striving and working and conniving and deceiving and lying. and he always ended up worse off. Abraham was the type that was resting. He was full of faith and trust in the Lord. Not that he did it perfectly, but that's the main gist of his life. He was just always walking in trust with the Lord. And so those are the two lives we have before us as we walk before the Lord. And today let's think about which one will we choose, the way of Abraham or the way of Jacob. So with that, I'll leave you with that, guys. I do thank you for watching the video today. I can't wait to see you guys tomorrow. I love you guys. God bless.